Good morning and welcome Lutheran Men in Missions Bold Gathering. Really excited for what we have in store for everybody today. And I'd first like to say my name is Hank Mays. I'm officially the host. I was introduced to Lutheran Men in Mission in about 2012 and actually attended a couple of the triennials on the east side of the U.S. and actually hosted some of the live streams for the Bold Gatherings here with St. John's in Centralia and Gloria Dei Lutheran. The men came together. We watched these live streams. And then, of course, COVID hit and things kind of came to a screeching halt. So we're really excited that we're back in front of the men throughout the country. And I think you're going to really enjoy what the speakers have for you today. I know I'm excited about it. So with that said, let's bow our heads and say prayer. Gracious Father, we give you thanks this day for the beautiful weather and for bringing everybody safely together. And we ask that you also oversee and make sure we return to our loved ones safely. We ask that you bless us with the Holy Spirit so that we may discern what these men have to share with us in their lives and their faith with Jesus Christ. We also ask you to bless us with the Holy Spirit so that we may be able to take what we learned today and become bold followers of Christ. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Ryan Brown. And he's from Marysville, Bethlehem in Marysville, and he's a youth director up there, and he spends most of his time, a lot of his time, in nonprofit. So, Mr. Ryan Brown, please, if you would. Thank you.
I'm just going to pull this down because I move around a fair amount. So just a simple amendment. So I'm actually at Faith Lutheran Lakewood, formerly at Bethlehem Lutheran in Marysville. And the reason for that transition is actually part of the reason for this talk. So first I want to start with our gospel reading this morning. And this is from the book of, where am I at here? The book of Matthew, chapter 14. The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted. Herodias had just had her daughter ask for John the Baptist's head, and he granted it. So John was beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then he went and told Jesus. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them some food." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So this morning, I'm going to ask you to kind of walk with me here as we weave together some different strands, because I've got a rope to build, but there's different ways we're going to get there. So the first is kind of simple. My story starts in a little Lutheran church. It was very selfish, very self-centered, and they were intent on their cruise ship model of ministry, right? What's best for us is best for us. And so I was kind of stuck in that model and had been in that place for about 8 years. And in the 8th year, a shooting happened at a local high school, and I was on the chaplain response for that particular incident, and went and was at reunification and supported that work. And for the next 18 months, listened as the church groaned over its investment into the community and why their ROI wasn't big enough. Why aren't more kids coming to our youth group? Why aren't more things happening in our church because we gave $500 for kids to go bowling or whatever? And I just started to really get annoyed. It was like a gnat in my ear saying, saying you need to get out of this situation. And I started working with local nonprofit, other churches, the city, the county, all these folks to say, how do we close gaps? How do we support people? And that led me to leaving that role and starting a nonprofit, which is called Link Northwest. And the whole aim of our game is to connect different industries, agencies, community members together to again, close gaps. How do we support people well? And so that's one strand, and that's Link is what I currently do. I'm the CEO and president of that group now. And so hold on to that one strand for me. So the other strand is about the same time that the shooting incident happened, 2017. Pardon me. 2013, I was hosting a community event. It was Healthy Communities Challenge Day is what it was called. And we were expecting around 4,000 people to show up. We had hired this gentleman to come and blow bubbles for kids, like the great big ridiculous bubbles, right? And we were gonna pay him $600 for 30 minutes. Put that in your back pocket, y'all. $600 for 30 minutes to blow bubbles if you need a second job. Right? And so anyway, we get 2 weeks into the event, or two weeks from the event. We're excited about this thing coming, and he calls and says, somebody in Medina wants to pay me $1,200 for the same amount of time, so I'm going to take that job. $1,200 for 30 minutes. Put that in your back pocket, right? But we had promoted and printed The Bubble Man is coming, right? So we couldn't back out on that promise to the community, so somebody had to become an expert in bubbles. And so the whole table is looking at me, and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this, but we'll give it a shot. So I start doing research and digging in, and I find all these different recipes for bubbles and how to blow the big bubbles. And over a course of 2 weeks, transformed into the Bubble Doctor. And people now call me the Bubble Doctor in our community, and I can blow bubbles as big as your car. I was tempted to bring some today to actually show you. I've blown bubbles that would reach from the back of the sanctuary all to the front and have special solution. It takes me 45 minutes just to make the bubble juice, the mix, in order to blow these bubbles, right? And it's absolutely ridiculous. It's the most ridiculous thing that I do. I love doing it, but it's also just totally ludicrous, right? So that's another strand, so I want you to hold on to that. A year before all of that happened, I started volunteering with this group, going down, and I was playing Santa Claus, and I was playing the Easter Bunny, and it's a respite home for medically fragile children, kids that have been in car accidents, that are paralyzed from the neck down, kids that have been born with defects and are unable to care for themselves, and their families can't do all the medical work. And so I started doing all this volunteering and engaging with different kids that were essentially on hospice, that were all transitioning from life early, right? And challenging work, hard work, but it was always so great to be able to go down and be that jolly old Saint Nick, and support their families and hand out presents and do those things. And so there's another strand. So now we've got three strands that we're holding on to. Fast forward now, and I start this nonprofit. We're doing this work, and I start getting phone calls to be a part of different community events, and would I consider bringing bubble machines and blowing bubbles? And I said, it's no skin off my back to do that. I'm glad to support that effort. And so I started, showing up. How do I show up well, both as a hope dealer, right? Like I want people to know something more than just fun bubbles and that experience, but also to alleviate tension. And so the community that I'd volunteered with, this medically fragile community, called and said, we'd like the Bubble Doctor to come and do a spring event for a student of ours, or a child of ours. And it was her birthday. And I said, absolutely, I'll come down and do that. And so we get everything set up, and I'm talking with the nurses, and she's actually on hospice at this point. She's terminal, but they don't have a date really in mind and what that looks like, but they know the end is near. And so I'm carrying that weight, and we start blowing bubbles. And I have an industrial bubble machine, and I start blowing bubbles just around the crowd, right? And I walk over to her, and I'm about this far away, and the bubbles start landing on her, and she starts giggling, and she can't see, she can't hear, she can't speak. She's in a wheelchair, completely unable to move. She's on a feeding tube, the whole thing, right? And she's giggling, and I look over, and the nurses are sobbing, and I was like, why are you, I don't understand. I mean, I love this and I get it, but why are you crying? And they'd never heard her laugh before. She'd been there for 13 years and she'd never laughed before. And so blowing bubbles on her was like this miraculous moment where she couldn't do any of those things, but she could still feel. And the bubbles popping created this moment for her where she was laughing, right? And it totally took me back that bubbles would create that experience for her and then for all of us, right? It was sacramental what these bubbles were doing. And so I left from that experience and went home and just kind of, grieved a little bit and celebrated a little bit. And they called 2 weeks later and she had passed away and thanked me for blowing bubbles on her and giving her a moment of joy in her life. And the more I thought about it and the more I continue to think about it, and what I really want to bring to y'all is the gospel doesn't have to be that hard, right? We tend to make it theological. We tend to make it, how do we fly to a place and build a school? How do we go somewhere and lift heavy things for the sake of the gospel? How do we, right? And I blow bubbles on people. And last summer, I was asked to blow bubbles at a Pride event, the first Pride event in Arlington. And I was reluctant, but there was a friend of mine that was participating and helping organize. And so I can come blow some bubbles at your Pride event. I don't mind. And so I went and we get everything going and it's really great, right? And the people are being very respectful and kind. And I just blew some bubbles and talked about the science of it, whatever. And about 20 minutes into the event, 45 protesters showed up from head to toe, completely covered and very threatening. And just creating this powerful, like angry force in a place that was very light and fun and friendly, lots of kids around. And it was just so dark. And I'm not going to say where I stand in that particular issue, but I do stand against hate in that place. Like that was inappropriate in the way that they were handling that. And how did we get them to leave? I blew 50,000 bubbles at them. I set my bubble machines right in front of them and turned them on. And how do you be mad at a group of protesters getting bubbles just flown at them and they're swatting at these bubbles and things? It was brilliant, right? I won't say where I stand on the issues, but I will say I stand against hate. And being able to create so much joy in a space and then also to use that joy to drive away hate was really powerful. And it doesn't have to be difficult. We don't have to come armed. We don't have to come aggressive or angry. Sometimes it's just how we blow bubbles, right? Sometimes it's just about how we show up for people. And so the readings here, this reading in particular, is a big standout for me. So Jesus, his cousin has just been murdered, right? And he's getting the news from his cousin's best friends. They're coming to him. John's dead. They cut his head off. They delivered his head on a platter. And his disciples came to him and he withdrew like we would do, right? We would, like he just was, I have to leave. And he's trying to take his leave, and the crowds followed him anyway. They still, and that's part of the infectiousness of Jesus, right? They just had to be close. And I want to think that it was because he was sweet and kind and whatever else, but humanity loves drama and humanity loves anger. And so I want to believe they were coming because what a powerful guy and what a sweetheart, right? But I also think they were waiting to see what he was going to do. Like, is this guy who is so powerful and doing so many things, is this the moment? Is he going to finally get angry and do what he came to do? So Jesus, they land of this huge crowd. He has compassion on the crowd and he healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place. The actual Greek word there is a desolate place. There's nothing here. It's a desolate place. It's already getting late. Let's send these people home, send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. And then we know what happens. Jesus tells them that they're going to feed him. So we're going to weave the last rope into this thing. So, and the last rope is actually out of this, but out of this. So there's something that we all need to assume. I believe we all need to assume about Jesus that is not written, right? And it's a very simple concept, but like what we read is all the moments where Jesus did something, right? There's everybody was like, whoa, look at what he did. Whoa, look at what he did. And so we get these 4 different accounts of Jesus' life and how he stopped and helped this person or stopped and did this miracle, whatever else. But that's not the whole story. That's not the whole picture of the life of Jesus, right? Jesus actually did a lot more than that. And so the thing that I want us to stand with, the last rope I want us to assume, is that Jesus, in between all of the things that he did a lot more things, like stop and get that guy some sandals, stop and get a glass of water for that lady, stop and, make sure that person had a sandwich. The assumption is that these are the things that Jesus did, the only things that Jesus did. But the greater assumption we have to make is that Jesus was on a mission to constantly be changing people, and not changing people because he needed them changed, but interacting like, do you need a glass of water? How can I help you with your shoes? Could I blow some bubbles for you today? Right? Like he was teaching people how to help all the time. And that was the whole mission of the work, was to show people how to be doers, that God was a doer. How can we be doers? How can we work alongside the gospel? So there's that last rope, right? So now, weaving all of that together, what's the most ridiculous thing you've ever done for the sake of the gospel? The most ludicrous thing you've ever done for the sake of the gospel? For me, it was learning how to blow bubbles. It would have been wildly easy to make this bubble guy look horrible. This guy bailed out for double the money. Nobody used him for your birthday parties. We don't have bubbles today because he backed out, right? But that's not who I am, and that's not who we're going to be. We're going to be a people who figure it out, right? What are we willing to do for the sake of the gospel? Not how big are we willing to lift, not how amazing are we going to build, but like how simple. Have you ever just bent over and tied some stranger's shoe for the sake of the gospel? Have you ever offered chewing gum to somebody because their breath was bad for the sake of the gospel? Have you ever, right? Like the simplicity of it is so hypercritical, and not to like dissuade from the feeding of the 5,000, but how many little things happen? How many thousands of people got fed that we don't read about? How many hundreds of thousands of people got engaged by Jesus in the area because of simple acts that didn't get written down? All of the ways that Jesus was proclaiming to people and trying to show the disciples the way, right? And I think that to me is the call and the challenge to all of us. Is like, I had to learn how to blow bubbles because we made a promise and I was going to keep it. And that day I blew bubbles for like 700 children, and it was wild and crazy and super fun, right? But then a couple of years later, I got to blow bubbles on a kid who was terminal and make her laugh for the first time in her life. And she passed away with that moment of joy still in her, right? And that's a gospel moment. And so the call for us is to take those small moments, to be people who are change makers, not in massive, huge ways, but to take little moments to speak into people's lives. To feed 5,000 people doesn't mean to stop and feed 5,000 people all at once. It means, how do we feed 5,000 people this year? How do we feed 5,000 people this decade? How do we take the little moments, right? And how do we do that collaboratively? Because the work that I got into the work that I'm in now because the church said, we're going to do what we can with our people alone. We're going to serve right here on our terms, and that's it. And that's not my church. That's not this. It's not the church. We are not called to be people to make a point. We are called to be people who make a difference. And that calling is not easy, but it is entirely worth it. And sometimes it means blowing bubbles, right? So I was going to bring bubbles and blow them on you. It would have made a giant mess in this building, so I opted to not do that. But if you would like, I can send you the recipe. And for the sake of sharing this, I've only got a couple minutes here. For the sake of sharing this, I think it's important that you all know. We'll close with this. So in order to make bubbles, has anybody blown bubbles for kids or grandkids? Anybody done that before? Have you ever made your own bubble solution? I'm going to give you the recipe right now. And if you want it, I'll email it to you. So a good giant bubble is just soap and water, right? But in order to make the big bubbles, you have to have the soap be really sticky and the water be really wet, which sounds weird, right? So to make soap stickier, you have to add cornstarch. So I literally have to cook cornstarch on the stove, cornstarch and water, until it makes like almost a glue. It's super sticky. And then that goes into a bucket with Blue Dawn dish soap. Don't get the yellow. Blue Dawn dish soap. You get all that kind of like gelling together, right? And then you add more water, and then you have to add glycerin. And glycerin you can buy lots of different ways, but glycerin at Michael's or Hobby Lobby or whatever comes in little tubes for cake mix, like for making shiny icing on cakes. And you can buy a little tube like this. It's $8 for like a tiny little ounce, and it takes 2 tablespoons for my recipe to mix it all up, right? Or you can go to Walmart and you can buy like a giant 24-ounce tube that's got glycerin in it and works just fine. So who wants to guess what I put in my bubble solution? KY jelly, folks. It is a giant bottle of lube that goes into my bubble mix, right? And so when you see me out blowing bubbles, pictures of giant bubbles, humongous phallic-looking bubbles, it's because there's KY jelly in my bubble solution. And I've blown some serious bubbles and felt real bad about it. Real bad about it. But again, how comical that such simple things can bring so much joy to people. And again, closing with this thought, how many of you have ever seen a bubble last for more than an hour? Never, right? Because they're temporary. But that doesn't mean they can't bring joy in their moment, right? So with that, let's pray. God, we know that you are good and you're doing amazing things. We pray that you'll help us be a people of simplicity. That we would stop trying to be the next big thing and instead just be who we are and shine for people right where we are. Help us to be willing to take audacious, simple, ridiculous steps for the sake of people, to not ask, what can I do now, but what could I do instead? Help us to be willing to take those steps and help us to be a people, help us to be men on a mission with that in mind. With hope in mind, with 5,000 people, however I get there, in mind. God, I thank you for this group and their willingness to serve, their willingness to be here. Help us to grow and to learn today. It's in your holy name that we pray. Amen. Thank you.
We're at Trinity Lutheran Church in Parkland, Washington, and that is right next door to Pacific Lutheran University. We've got a very friendly relationship with them, and our next speaker is actually a student there, and he is also a minister's assistant here at Trinity, so he's very comfortable talking about his faith and Jesus Christ. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Logan Vandenberg from Montana. Logan?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm blessed to have this opportunity to speak to you all. So the name of this speech is Young Men in the Church. And as a young man, I've realized that my generation is facing a significant mental health crisis that's affecting the lives of many men like me. According to the Washington Post, suicides rose 8% among males ages 15 to 24, which was the largest increase of any group in 2021. Now, through this talk, there will be a lot of generalizations of young men, so this may not fit, and I would doubt that it fits the bill of all young men out there, but I derived this from the experiences that I've shared with classmates, students, and friends in my life. But I believe that this crisis is due largely to how young men have conceptualized their masculinity and what it means to be a man today. The term of masculinity has been deeply disrupted, and in turn it has caused many to have a fractured sense of identity and belonging. Today I want to talk to you about how this crisis and the church, specifically men in the church, can help. I believe the church can play a significant role in helping these young men find their place in a society by providing them with positive male role models and a sense of community. So let's explore this crisis together and see how we can positively impact the lives of these young men. I'll begin with a brief anecdote. During my senior year of high school, I had the opportunity of taking an internship class, the goal of which was to explore potential career opportunities. And so I decided to intern with my pastor and to explore the ins and outs of living and working in parish ministry. Our first initial meeting of the internship was centered around questions that I had about the internship, general questions about expectations, roles, meeting times, etc. But then, as pastors often do, the conversation changed to questions about my life, questions about my plans post-high school, and then the questions I had about faith in God. And during our conversation, I got what may be perhaps the most enlightening piece of information from my pastor, and it was this, that not all questions have answers. Having that come from someone who I looked up to as a role model and a pastor to tell me that not all questions have answers caused me to let out an almost audible sigh of relief at the realization of that truth, that I don't have to have it all figured out, nor am I going to. And that one piece of information from that interaction, I think, encapsulates the role of what male mentorship has had in my life. At that moment, I knew that men, and men of faith especially, don't have to have it all figured out. We can't know it all. We can't always anticipate what's next, and we must surrender ourselves to this fact that some things will be unknowable and unanswerable. But what about the questions that do have answers? I'll spend the next 10 minutes or so, maybe a little longer, trying to explore and provide an explanation as to why young men are struggling and how I believe the church can help. A lot of young men are struggling to find where they belong and fit inside the larger scope of society. As a result, this has caused a collective identity crisis. And I believe a large part of this situation revolves around how we conceptualize masculinity. The questions of what does being a man mean, and how does one effectively live that identity out harmoniously with others? If you dive into any of the literature surrounding masculinity, you very quickly encounter the term toxic masculinity. And I want to make it apparent that I don't wish to explore the topic of toxic masculinity itself. I just want to acknowledge one distinct aspect of how its implications in the lives of young men. I think it's relatively uncontroversial to state that the term toxic masculinity and the concepts surrounding it have deeply shaped and reconstructed society's notions of what it means to be a man. Its attempt to identify the negative and harmful attributes of masculinity. And while these criticisms of masculinity were aptly needed to address some of the real societal problems at hand, it's left the conception of masculinity to be defined by its deficits and not its contributions. Personally, I grew up largely learning from the media and society at large what I should not be as a man. I learned things like not to be violent and aggressive. I learned the problems with being stoic or unemotional. I learned all these things, what not to aim toward, but I never learned what to aim at. I'll switch. In the winters, I work as a downhill ski instructor. And when I teach the more advanced lessons and we get into the more challenging terrain, I tell my students not to aim at the trees, but instead to look at the spaces between them to find the best path forward. This is because I have learned from years of painstaking experience and one broken back that if you look at the tree, the very thing that you want to avoid, it's the one thing you'll hit and inevitably run into. And I think this same concept can be translated to masculinity. If these young men are trying to grasp at the concept of masculinity and are focusing only on its problems and its harmfulness and its deficits, and we only teach the things that we should not be aiming at, then we will inevitably hit those things. I think this is what's caused this recent resurgence in the following of these pseudo-masculine social media influencers who urge men to be aggressive and dominating. When young men try to embrace their masculinity, they're finding only these notions of what masculinity's deficits are and not its assets. Just the other week, I had the opportunity to sit down with a group of my peers and try to define masculinity and what it meant to us. And it became very apparent that it's nearly impossible to find a concrete or all-encompassing definition of masculinity. I think that's one of its most beautiful attributes. It occurred to me that masculinity can't be defined in isolation or on its own. Instead, it can only be defined with our relationships with others. Masculinity is not a set of attributes associated with men, it's how you interact with others as a man. And in order to learn what masculinity is, we have to have some sort of template or blueprint, and more specifically, a role model. Be it our dads, pastors, brothers, friends, or coaches, we need male mentorship in order to understand what masculinity means and what it should look like. I think back to one of the most challenging moments in my life. Before coming to PLU, I was a student at the University of Wisconsin, go Badgers. And very early on in my time there, I realized it was not a good fit for me. I had to make the decision to drop out and move back halfway across the country. I had to turn down opportunities that I had worked extremely hard to get. I had to re-examine my core values and what I wanted in life, and I had to completely restructure my sense of vocation. Not an easy thing to do at 18. And one of the first persons I called during this process to understand exactly what I was going through was my pastor. And it was because of this critical relationship that I had with the male role model that enabled me to process and understand what I was going through and successfully work through it. As we face these life-altering challenges that inevitably come with adulthood, we need these mentors to guide us and show us and how to live out our identities of being men. My notions of leadership, service, and gratitude, some of the deepest attributes that I hold most dear to myself, came from my cross-country coach in high school. He taught me not only the ins and outs of running, but the ins and outs of character. He was a man who truly led by example and has kept me accountable to this day. My insatiable love for knowledge, my boundless curiosity for life, and my inability to never stop asking questions is inextricably linked to the role of male mentorship that my dad had in my life. A scientist by training and an artist at heart, he pushes me to always indulge in new areas of study and has always supported me in all my endeavors of exploring life in new places. My male role models have clearly and carefully shaped my notions of masculinity and have made me the man I am today. And I'm extremely blessed to have had these individuals in my life. But as a lot of young men who have become increasingly isolated from positive, tangible, interpersonal relationships, we've begun to see a lack of personal face-to-face interaction with male role models, and it's caused a lot of people to find sources online to fill that need. And it's not that there aren't good examples of positive masculinity online. There are a lot. But unfortunately, the algorithms of recommendation are not centered around positivity. They're centered around the loudest pieces of information, the ones with the most controversy, and the ones with the most clicks. I look out into this crowd and I see a room full of male mentors, deeply rooted in their faith. Good men, men of God, and you all can be mentors to these young men. These young men need you, and they need a relationship with you, and they need to understand what it looks like to have positive males like you in their lives. There are a plethora of things that young men are lacking in lives, They feel like they don't belong in society. They don't feel a need to be accountable for their actions because they think they can no longer add anything of value. A lot of men are lacking a sense of love and being loved by someone. The church and its members are in a unique position. We can offer a place where young men can build a sense of community, take on a feeling of accountability and responsibility, and form a relationship with a God who knows and loves them. An overwhelming majority of the men I've encountered in the Lutheran Church and the church at large, through their faith and their masculinity, have exhibited a commitment to the things that the church holds most dear: unconditional love, acceptance, recognizing our faults and our sins, understanding that we are forgiven, and moving forward with the mission of Christ. Many of the young men that I've encountered who feel lonely and isolated are itching to be a part of a community. These young men want to feel as if they're adding value to the lives of others, and most of all, they want to feel as if they belong. Congregations, these communities of Christ, have the foundations already in place to be a basis of support for young men. Churches foster a sense of belonging, and they can now provide opportunities for young men to serve and can prepare a place where they can feel a sense of accountability and acceptance. You don't necessarily have to focus on convincing all of them to become Christians, but you can still offer them opportunities to live out the gospel. Young men need the church, and the church needs young men. Now, I'll be honest, I don't have an exact answer on how we can get young men re-engaged. Many pastors and congregational leaders have spent far more time than I have trying to uncover the secret to getting young men back into the church. Mostly, I just want to bring this to everyone's attention that there are dire needs for both groups to re-engage with one another. I do, however, have 3 brief recommendations that I'd like to share and that I think could help. The first is don't compete with the desire for fun. Young men have plenty of opportunities to grab dinner with friends, play a sport of their choice, beat the next level of a video game, or go to a party. The church has far more value and meaning to offer than just a place to have fun. This isn't to say that church can't be fun. I have a blast here, personally, or it shouldn't have opportunities for fun, because it does and it should, but marketing it as your hook, it's not going to be a sustainable way to attract young men. Secondly, lowering the barrier for non-Christian affiliated men. An increasing number of individuals either have experience in some additional faith background or are not used to or interested in Christianity. Lowering the barrier of entry so that all young men, no matter where they are in their journey of faith, can approach. Allowing those willing to lend a hand to be involved in a community centered around love, grace, and service. And these paths of service don't have to be centered on God to still be doing God's work. The third is personal invitations, and this is where you all come in. Nothing feels better than knowing that someone is thinking of you and cares enough to call and invite you to something. Young men are used to receiving texts and emails inviting them to join some organization or engage in some sort of activity, but a phone call is far more personable and a meaningful way to reach out. So here's my call to action. I urge each and every one of you to reach out to a young man in your life, to provide them with opportunities where they can center themselves around acts of service, leadership, and grace. And I mean, pick up your phone, call them, let them know that you're here, that you want to grab lunch or get a cup of coffee, or that you want to invite them to a service project, help out with a community dinner, or maybe just volunteer in decorating the church for Christmas. Not all of them are going to say yes, and in fact, some of them won't return your call, but some will. And if some get engaged and see the value in community and the mentorship that the church has to offer, others will follow. So to recap, because of the necessary criticisms that masculinity has undergone, we have been left to define masculinity by its deficits and not its assets. And in fact, I would argue that masculinity cannot be defined in isolation. It is a relationship between a man and the world that surrounds him, his community. And because we have been faced with this definition of deficits, we have begun to run into the problems we have been trying to avoid. And in order to ensure that young men of today exhibit the characteristics of positive masculinity, we need mentors. Men to show other men what it means to be a positive man in society. And what better role models than men of the church, men of faith. You, men of unconditional love and grace, men of acceptance and humility, and ones willing to admit that not all questions have answers. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Kurt Larson. I'm on the planning team for Lutheran Men in Missions. So I actually live in Wisconsin, but I flew out here to be with you guys and loving every minute of it. But, it's been said that faith is caught more than it's taught. And there's probably some truth to that. And I certainly caught faith from my father. Just growing up in the household and seeing how he was trying to be a disciple of Christ, not perfect, but knew his faults and relied on the grace of God, because none of us are perfect. But he got involved many, many years ago, probably 30 years ago, in a group called Lutheran Men in Mission, which is where we are here today. And through that, he met a guy named Doug Haugen right here. And they immediately became very, very good friends, the kind of friends that you can talk to at any time and share what's going on in your life. And so my dad has been enriched and blessed by his friendship with Doug, and I've gotten to know Doug, and so it's passed down the generation. My father's still alive, but so I have the blessing too of being a friend and a brother with Doug, and I think that's what his talk is on here today as well, is on friendship. So I don't want to steal any more of your thunder here, Doug. I'm going to let you come up and talk about friendship.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Kurt. Let's see. I'm Doug, son of God, family man, and friend. I exist to love and serve my wife and family and to bring men and women into true freedom in Jesus Christ. I do this by being present to everyone I encounter, or at least attempting to be, working with leaders to produce men who are bold and daring followers of Jesus Christ, and working with my wife to help couples turn their homes into grace places. You look at this picture here, and you look at coals. They were created for one purpose: to be consumed. And when that coal rolls off to the side, it ends up half-baked and cold. You and I are like those coals. And when I roll off to the side and I'm not touching other people's lives or allowing other people's lives to touch mine, I too grow half-baked, and I'm not fulfilling my purpose. I can only fulfill my purpose in my life when I'm allowing others to touch my life and touching the lives of others, and allowing myself to be, along with others, consumed by the love of God so that I share it. Loneliness is an epidemic these days, but the percentage of men with at least 6 close friends fell by half since 1990, from 55% to 27%. Recent studies showed that the percentage of men without any close friends jumped from 3% to 15%, a 5-fold increase. This is critical, guys. And when we think of friendship among men, we tend to think of how women do friendship. Men and women do friendship differently. And I would say that women tend to do friendship a little bit more eye to eye. We guys, a lot of the times, are more shoulder to shoulder. My father took about 6 years, had cancer for about 6 years before he finally died from it. And I remember my mother telling me, "I'm so concerned about your dad because he doesn't have friends like I do." Well, the typical thing was for mom and dad to go to the doctor and get the next stage of bad news. And they would come home and mom would go to the telephone and mom and dad would go to his chair in the corner of the room. And mom would be on the phone to all of us and to her friends and others talking about the latest bad news that dad had while dad was contemplating in that chair. And I'll never forget the day that I visited dad in the hospital and his best friend, Bud, came to see him. Buddy was also his cousin. Buddy was also a pastor. But it was his best friend that came to see him that day. And they talked about everything but cancer and dying. They talked about accidents they had been in, trouble they had been in, time they had served in Korea, and all kinds of stuff like that. And I'll never forget when Bud gets up to leave and he walks across the room and he stands in the door and he turns around and these two men simply looked at each other for the longest time. And I felt almost embarrassed to be there because it was an intimate moment among these two men that vitally with their friendship loved one another. And I went home and I told my mom, you were right. Does not have friends like you because we do friends differently. Because what I saw today, Mom, was his best friend. There's a book out that came out a few years ago called The Buddy System by Jeffrey Grief. Very good book. I encourage you to take a look at it. And in this book, he talks about the 4 kinds of friends that we have. And I'll start at the bottom. The rust friends. Some of us here are old enough to have really rusty friends. You know, I'm 71 years old. Those are the friends that you can reconnect with even after many years of not seeing each other, and you just pick up where you left off. Or maybe you've kept in touch over the years through all of the time, but it's just always there. Last week, I was back in my hometown of Moorhead, Minnesota. On the way to my brother's house, I saw my friends sitting out on the porch that I hadn't seen for decades. Just stopped and sat next to them on the porch, and we talked like we had never been apart. Rust friends. Rust friends. And then he talks about just friends. Well, those are the guys I work with, you know? Those are the guys that we go to church with. Those are our neighbors. Casual acquaintances, they're part of our network, maybe not critical, but we miss them or we remember their faces, we remember their names. They're just friends, casual. And then there's to Jesus, that might have been, to Jesus, that might have been the multitudes, or that might have been the 72 that he was sending out, the larger crowds. And then Jeffrey Grief talks about the trust friends. Now we're getting close. These are the friends that are like family. These are the people that we have some shared history and experience with. These are the people, I think, in John 15, where Jesus says, you're not my servants, you're my friends. Imagine being called Jesus' friend. He says, you're not my servants. And these are the guys that are like family to us. And it's a smaller group than the just friends. See, these are the guys that are going to know something about you. I used to ask, if you were to, and more today, I realize that people are being cremated, but I used to tell guys that it takes 6 guys to carry you when you leave this world. It takes at least 6 guys to carry you while you're here. Who are your 6 guys? Who are the 6 guys that you would say carry you in this world? You know, when we moved out here 3 years ago, I began working with Project 12. If you go to project12.net, one word, project12.net, and there's a series that we've been writing there called Lifelines. It's based on the Serendipity Bible. You'll see in a minute. And I'm working with 19 writers and editors. And I thought after we'd been doing some work, I need to test this out a little bit among somebody. And I'd moved out here and I'd been making some contacts with guys in other churches about men's ministry. Well, maybe some of them would be willing to test this out with me. And so we got Covenant, Charismatic, Episcopal, Lutheran, bunch of guys together. And we did 6 sessions. And it went pretty well. And we got to know each other. And some of the things we began to hear things like, I haven't shared this with anyone ever before, and we'd hear stuff and we'd pray for each other and we got to love each other. And so at the end of 6 sessions, I said, okay, guys, thanks a lot for, helping me out testing this. It seems to work. Doug, we don't want to stop. And so that has gone, guys, from virtual, where it started, to a church library, to the brewery where we meet every week at 4 o'clock over beers, and it generally ends with prayer in the brewery. And the conversation is some of the most real that you could ever imagine. And I got to tell you, when I had my heart attack last January, these guys were among the first to be contacted and among the first to respond and pray for me and share their love with me. It's like family. Who are those 6 guys? Who are that handful of guys in your life? And then we go to now there's the must friend. Who is that friend that you could call at any time of the day or night and say, I need help? I used to ask this question If it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you need help, who do you call? Oh, my wife. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're not with your wife and you're in trouble. Who do you call? Oh, my pastor. Well, pastor doesn't count. And it's amazing. Many men, maybe most men, can't give you an answer on that. And we need to, all of us need that answer. I'm blessed. I've had those guys, a couple of you that are here today, that if I ever needed anything, even in the middle of the night, I would know who to call. And I'm here today because of one or two guys like that in my life. Who is that guy that's in your life? For Jesus, that was Peter, James, and John. Now, were they always dependable? Oh, yeah. He calls them away. I'm going to be praying. You guys stay here. Oh, they fall asleep. No, they weren't always dependable, but they were his guys, and especially Peter. Well, if Jesus needed friends, if Jesus needed trust friends and must friends, I guess we do too, because they make life what it is for us. Now, when we talk about ministry with men, and how do we do it with different people? Okay, there's different things to do. Okay, if we're zeroing on just friends, and this is valid. You have socials, you have meals, you have work projects, you have Bible studies, you have fun retreats. That's okay. It's a way to connect with and reach people. Then again, you take it a step further. You want to talk about trust friends and developing those relationships in places that are safe to develop them. Then you talk about small groups, Bible study, topical stuff, active and adventure, things that are going to challenge guys. If you want to talk about ministry that will really develop must friends, that's where you look at things like high adventure and places that are safe and brave places and spaces, as I say. Places that are incredibly safe, and we can develop that with each other. Places that are so safe that we're able to share and hear those things like, I haven't said this to anyone before, but I've always wondered about this, or I've always worried about this, or I did this 20 years ago and I've never forgiven myself for it. Those kinds of conversations. Opportunities. I want to thank Logan because he really introduced my speech very well. Because you're exactly right. No matter what age we are, it's about investing in each other, and it's about being inquisitive, and it's about being curious about each other. And it's not about, hey, can I get you to come to my men's breakfast? Or, hey, can I get you to sit in the pew next to me? No, it's about, can I get engaged in a relationship with you? Several years ago, when we had young men working with us, one of those young men came up with this, the I Go model, and it's in a book called Coming of Age. But he said to us, first of all, identify me. Even, give me some signal that you even know I exist, that you see me. And especially for those few that might be in church. That generally aren't in church, but let me know that I'm seen. Acknowledge me. Secondly, invite me. And don't invite me necessarily to your men's breakfast or to your church function or whatever, but invite me into relationship. Engage in conversation with me. Take some time. Invest and invite and invest. Take some time. Develop an ongoing relationship. Pour some time into him. And guys, this isn't only about young men, but it's about friends of any age. That's what it takes. And we have all the time churches asking us, well, how do we get young men? And what we tell them is, don't program. Don't program, but befriend. And it's one-on-one. Come alongside of, spend time with, and be willing to spend time with young men where they want to spend time. And be with them. And be open to where the conversations might take you. There's a man, I don't know how many of you have ever had a chance to meet your hero. I've had that opportunity a couple of times, and this is one of them. And those of you who have been around the church very much know that if you've had anything to do with small group ministry in the last 50 or 60 years, this guy has been a part of it, more than likely, because he's a major player in the role of small group ministry. And Lyman Coleman first of all, among other things, was the general editor of the Serendipity Bible for Groups. 20,000 questions for small groups in there, although I haven't counted them, but 20. And we took that and made that the Master Builder's Bible for Men. We put our cover on it, and we put on the front part of it, here's how you do men's ministry. That's Lyman's work. And it was several years ago, on Good Friday, it happened to be, I was at his home for lunch, and he told me that he had had a train wreck in his life. This is my hero. This is my hero. His wife had died from a missed diagnosis. His son had died in an accident about the same time. And he was now retiring out of his publishing work with Serendipity. He went into major depression. And he told me about a retreat that he went to, not a spiritual retreat. Well, it was spiritual, but not necessarily Christian, but a men's retreat. And he said, I went to this retreat. A pastor friend of mine dragged me there. And he said, you know, Doug, I'm a pastor, and I've never heard so many four-letter words in all my life with the. But this might have been the closest thing to what I imagined the church should be. And he told me about his experience and how it had helped him come out of that deep depression and the alienation that he had been experiencing. And I said to him, Lyman, what I'd like you to do is baptize this. You know how to do it. You had this experience. Make this Christian, and you know how to do it. And then, oh, by the way, let Lutheran men be your guinea pigs. And so we started the 1 Year to Live retreat several years ago. And we've had hundreds of men go through this retreat now ever since. And it's been the most life-changing retreat, the most life-changing experience that I have ever seen for me and for men. I think I've done the weekend about 20 times. And I've benefited every time. I thought, okay, well, I'm one of the leaders, and you know, but every single time I've been through this retreat, I have benefited, and I've come home a better man. This is the retreat, the experience that we've had, where we've had families thank us for the man that came home, because they saw such a difference in his life, and as a result, a difference in their lives. This is the opportunity to come together with other men and bare your soul as you never have before, and come away a stronger man. And so this fall at Black Lake Bible Camp, there's some pictures of the camp. We're going to be doing the 1 Year to Live retreat, October 6th through 8th, and I hope that you will really consider coming. We'll be passing out some brochures, and you don't want to be that coal that's off to the side and cold. This is what you were created to be burning, to be alive, to be together with others, and to be making a difference in the world.
1 year to live. What can I say? The 1 year to live men's retreat has changed my life. It's changed my life for the better. It's changed my life in ways that I could never imagine. My wife has seen the difference. My children have seen the difference. I'm a pastor, and my church has seen the difference. Before attending the 1 Year to Live men's retreat, I suffered from bouts of depression. I suffered from awkwardness. I suffered from loneliness that I didn't even know existed in my life. I was that little kid still waiting for his father to come and pick him up, but never showed. 1 Year to Live helped me to leave some things, some old things behind and start anew. It gave me a sense of freshness, a renewing. I thank my counselors, my new brothers, my new brethren, my new family for allowing me to pour out and pouring into me. The 1 Year to Live men's retreat is awesome. And I implore anybody who has the opportunity, any men who's looking just to add some freshness into their life, some newness into their lives, to take the opportunity. I would love to be your brother. I would love to allow you to pour out, just as I did. I'm a new man for it today. 1 year to live. It's giving me purpose, not only for that 1 year, that next year, but for my life. I look forward to living my life now. I thank you. You've done wonders for me. 1 year to live.
Remember, identify, invite, and invest. Amen.
I'm not going with him just like that. That was my father's reaction to my wardrobe choice one Sunday afternoon. Looking back, it was a hilarious predicament to put him in. He turned the corner past the garage, took one look, and did a 180 right back inside. What he saw was a scrawny kid wearing only a white tank top and his underwear. It really caught him off guard. With the red car in the background, I stuck out like a sore thumb. In my head, I was ready to go to the track. My father would usually run about 5 miles, and I would do a combination of running and walking. I don't know exactly what I was thinking at the time, but I must have thought that my father's running shorts looked similar. This is a story that gets brought up sometimes in our family, and we all laugh about the moment. I bring this up because God sometimes uses those embarrassing moments just to show how powerful his love is. I'm very grateful my parents didn't take me to the track dressed like that. I think God works similarly. Sometimes he will tell me when I'm doing something wrong, but inevitably sometimes I end up taking the hard way. I titled my speech Metamorphosis because I thought it was a sticky word for visualizing change. What does metamorphosis mean? It's a change of the form or nature of a thing or person into a completely different one by natural or supernatural means. Growing up, I always associated the word metamorphosis with caterpillars and butterflies. I didn't think much about the change or transformation that occurs, but I remember the stages very well. They were taught in science class frequently. It starts with an egg that matures into an adult. The stage that's most striking to me is the pupa stage. It seems so unusual, yet it's the most important. This stage is mandatory in order to change into a butterfly. It can't be skipped. Otherwise, the caterpillar doesn't live up to its potential. When the caterpillar is finished with the transformation, it eats its way through the chrysalis and emerges as a beautiful butterfly. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18 says, "But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord the Spirit." It reminds us to follow God's truth because he is the one that continuously transforms us. I think the butterfly analogy helps me visualize how God works. Sometimes I'm looking back at the ways God has changed me, and it's difficult to fathom how it's all happened. Sometimes I just have to say, thank you. I've lived in the Pacific Northwest for most of my life, and it's been a beautiful, beautiful place to grow up. Growing up, I was always eager to go outside and play. Outside, we had trees to climb, soccer balls to kick, and tennis balls to throw, to name a few. My parents even built a sandbox for my siblings and I to have a place to play and not dig up my mother's flowers. But that's not where my story begins. Many of you may not know, but I experienced an impactful event early in my life. When I was 3 years old, I was adopted from Beijing. My parents had an extreme amount of patience raising me. I was a curious child that didn't have nap time in my vocabulary. That's probably why I spent a considerable amount of time playing outside. My favorite sports were soccer and hockey. Unfortunately, I haven't played either in a while, but I still keep up running. Fortunately, there haven't been any more underwear runs. Last year, I started something new. I signed up for my first race. It was a Thanksgiving 5K, and I ended up placing 5th. Completing that 5K motivated me to complete another one, and I ended up placing 3rd. Seeing those times convinced me to complete a half marathon. I used to believe that people who contemplated running that distance were crazy. But sometimes you need to be a little crazy to set big goals and accomplish them. I recently completed my half marathon on March 26th with a time of 93 minutes and 19 seconds. I'd like to thank my friends for encouraging me to just do it and not live with regret of not trying. I actually almost missed that race entirely. I ended up getting sent the wrong starting line location and was running around the campus just trying to figure out where to go. Eventually, I found some runners in the race, and then they pointed me to the correct location. I think the most difficult part about that race was knowing that I started last. It was difficult in the beginning to mentally let that go and focus on enjoying the run. My highlight was probably the final mile. It was mostly uphill, but it was also lined with cherry blossoms. I think the scent kind of just gave me a little bit of an energy boost. But during that moment, I felt like I was dying. But simultaneously, I knew that I couldn't quit. That race is a great analogy on life. It doesn't matter what cards you're dealt, just play them. However, you need faith to accomplish it. If I hadn't believed in my God-given abilities, I probably wouldn't have run at all. It would have been easy to quit and just drive back home, but that's not how God wants us to behave. Now I've set a goal of running a marathon on November 26th, 2023. With a few races under my belt, I'm confident that it's going to be a fun journey. A couple of years ago, I wouldn't have thought this was possible. It shows God's power and love. He's constantly pushing me farther than I can imagine, and I couldn't do anything without his limitless love. I think my mom would say that I was born with a Hot Wheels in my right hand. I've always enjoyed them. Growing up, I even had a phase where I envisioned becoming a car designer. My favorite cars were always the exotics, with the screaming V10s and the V12s, and then also the older Japanese vehicles. Those beautifully designed cars wouldn't be special without their carefully crafted engines. Imagine hearing a Ferrari with a 4-cylinder engine. I would be so disappointed and just walk away. It's not about what we look like externally that matters the most. It's what's on the inside that counts. God has designed each of us in a unique way. Just like that loud and powerful V12, people can hear what you project from the inside before they even see you. I've encountered self-doubt many instances in my life, and it's projected in the way I interact with others sometimes. During those times, I also noticed that my relationship with God wasn't the best. I wouldn't pray enough about my situation and ask God for advice. What I was really doing was building up walls and acknowledging God passively. Has anyone ever been to a dam? If you haven't, imagine this monstrous wall that can cease billions of gallons of water from flowing. Sometimes God's love is like the water hitting the dam. In my case, the dam I built up was composed of doubt, pride, and selfishness. I doubted God's power to change things. But I realized that God uses the walls we build to showcase how powerful his love is. It's much stronger than the dams we construct. When the walls come tumbling down, we end up filled with God's love and emerging a new person. This is what God wants me to project to others. Like Thomas, I needed physical proof and had to learn things the hard way. Sometimes that doubt turned into self-doubt. Thankfully, God gives me reminders each morning when I get to take a breath and see my family and friends. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17 says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come." I had to accept Christ into my heart and let that become what I project to the world. I had to let God's love flow and stop building walls and commit to trust. Unfortunately, it's easier said than done. Still, we should take that leap of faith and start. Fortunately, God is a better planner than me. I don't remember much of my experience in Beijing, and I view it as God's way of watching over me. Being adopted didn't really affect me much until I had to do assignments about myself in school. It was difficult for me to say that I was adopted. Talking about it made me feel like I didn't fit in. I don't think it was ever anyone's intention, but talking about adoption also brought on some anxiety. It just felt awkward. And sometimes I didn't even feel like socializing with others. Ultimately, I was taking things into my own hands and ended up feeling self-doubt. Thankfully, God was always there as a friend. God really helped me through the anxiety of the experience. Looking back, taking things into my own hands and not trusting God only made things worse. It has also helped me realize that it's normal to go through struggles and definitely okay to ask God for help. One Bible leader that I could relate to was Moses, and he was adopted too. I thought it was super cool that he parted the Red Sea, but Moses also dealt with self-doubt. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 10, Moses says this, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." Moses felt like he couldn't handle the task of leading the people of Israel out of Egypt because he couldn't speak well. However, God provided his brother Aaron. I don't blame Moses for not wanting to immediately accept the task. It's scary when God calls us to do something bold, but it really shows how much confidence he has in us. Like Moses, God doesn't send us alone. He knows our inadequacies and places people in our lives so we can build each other up. This is exactly why each of us is present here. You are all leaders that God has called to work together. Despite your inadequacies, it took a while for me to realize my inadequacies don't make me weak. Instead, it shows that I put my trust in God. I can't believe that I get to share my story at my home church. It's an honor to be here, and it just shows how amazing God is. I'd be lying if I said that any change in my life happened overnight or by myself. I've been blessed to be raised in this church for over 20 years and have many life-changing experiences. My first major blessing was getting baptized here on September 23rd, 2001. Since getting baptized, I've participated in 2 ELCA youth gatherings. The first was in New Orleans, Louisiana in 2012, and the second in Detroit, Michigan in 2015. I really appreciated the in-person experience of viewing God's work in other parts of the country. New Orleans was special for me because I have family there. I vaguely remember seeing the Mardi Gras parade and driving around the city when I was younger. So going back with my church family and experiencing worship in the Superdome was my highlight. I remember leaving the Superdome one night after worship and getting greeted with about a foot of water covering the streets. After that, I don't really complain about the rain here in Washington too much because of that. Regardless of what happened, these are all events that I'm grateful for, and God's used them to shape my character. Writing this speech has helped me remember the numerous ways God has blessed me. I hope that it gives you some insight on how God has worked in my life and how my accomplishments wouldn't be possible without Him. I pray that everyone present and listening receives the courage to tell others how God has blessed you. You may feel like you're just a blank canvas, but remember that God is always at work. Allow God to tear down those walls, isolating you from His love. Let Him unwrap your chrysalis so that you can share with the world how He has transformed you. I would like to close with a verse from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being transformed day by day. Amen.
Good afternoon. So, I've known Doug for a while, and I wasn't necessarily going to out him for this, but we have been in this little study group for a while, and he's the reason that I'm here today. And to Logan's point in his talk, where he said about actually making the phone call to invite someone in and to get to know them, Doug called me, and I did answer my phone in that moment. I was in a good mood, and where I said, yes, I'll give this talk. And I thought, why did I answer my phone? So here I am. But I am happy to be here, so please don't think that. But over the past 2 years, though, my wife and I have gone through what we've called a season of stress. There's not just any one thing that causes stress, but a number of different things that all seem to be kind of coincide within the past 2 years. And I'm here to just share some humble advice that helped me and my wife get through this period and helped me keep my faith in God, and hope that maybe it'll help any of you or anyone you know. But first, I'll kind of give you a rundown of what we went through. So 2 years ago, in the spring, May of 2021, we bought a little house in Olympia, and we thought it would be great to have a little fixer-upper, 100-year-old house, and we were living with my father-in-law at the time, and we're really at that point ready for our own place. And once we started, we thought, we don't have much experience, but on TV they make it look easy, and after a few months we should be ready to move in and get settled, etc. And we quickly realized that there was a lot more rot and damage in the foundation and framing than we had realized, and that was going to take a lot more time than just a couple months, and a lot more money than we had planned for. And that's fine. And then halfway through the summer, my wife got pregnant. And after years of trying, it finally happened. We were very excited, only for her to miscarry several months later. And it was really, and as hard as it was for me, it was 10 times harder for my wife. But a few months after that, by Christmas, she was pregnant again. And we thought, this one might actually carry through. And we were still living with my father-in-law, and I was still working on this renovation, nights and weekends, and my progress was very slow. And I realized that at this rate, the baby's going to be here, and we still won't have our own house to live in. And so my wife graciously allowed me to quit my sales job so I could focus on this house renovation, so we could actually live in it by the time and have it ready by the time our child came. And that was great. And the spring went along. We had time. I was blessed to be able to go to my sister's wedding and all this. And then, a year ago today, or a year ago next week, we were able to move into our house. But I still had to put siding on over the summer, but at least, the bathroom was working, and we had hot water. And one morning last June, I got a call from my aunt, and my mom's house in South Texas had caught fire. And it was early morning, so my mom was asleep in the house. And she was rescued, and she was pulled out by firefighters. She was unconscious and sent to the hospital. And all I knew is that she was in the hospital and the house was fired, but we didn't know what her condition would be like and if she would survive. And I was distraught all day. And we immediately booked flights to fly to Texas, but there was only, Alaska Airlines has a direct flight to San Antonio, but only every other day. So we still had a day to wait till we could get down there. And later that afternoon, I finally talked to a nurse who assured me that she was going to survive. and that she was being transferred to the Army Hospital in San Antonio, where they have one of the best burn units in the country. And I didn't have to say goodbye right away. But there was still the question of what her long-term health and life would look like. So we went down and all that. And so we got back, and later about a month before the baby was due, we got a diagnosis that the baby had a hole in its diaphragm, which meant that the lung, the stomach and intestines had moved up into the chest cavity and prevented the left lung from fully developing. This means, and so this is a condition called congenital diaphragmatic hernia, or CDH for short. And it meant that our baby would have to be intubated for oxygen support and sent to the NICU right away, as soon as it was born. We wouldn't be able to hold the baby or anything. It would just rush to the NICU right away. The best place for this condition is Seattle Children's. So we were able to meet with a care team up there and kind of have an idea of what things would look like, what would happen, and when. But the overall condition and severity of it, we still didn't know. It really wouldn't reveal itself until after the required surgery, if our child was healthy enough to have that surgery when they were born. So, a year ago, on August 24th, our son Daniel was born in Seattle and immediately taken to the Seattle Children's. And on the third day of his life, he had a successful surgery. And after 49 days, a 49-day stay in the hospital, he was able to come home with us, which we were finally ready. We had the house ready, we had the crib, the siding was done, it was all done, and we could finally be home. And we could start being new parents. About a month after we got home, my father-in-law, Mike, went into the hospital for end-stage liver failure. And once the liver begins to fail, it doesn't recover. And he'd been in the hospital for many other issues, for his heart, he was diabetic, and this and that and the other, but this was a much more serious, and he knew that as well. And end-stage liver failure, if you guys are not familiar, he suffered a lot of memory loss and delusions. It was very stressful for me and my wife, new parents, and trying to get used to a new routine, and then watching your parent suffer and decline was really tough. And people with this condition can live for up to 2 years, but that's 2 years of really steady decline, steep decline. But that last January, Mike passed away. It was sudden. We didn't expect it to happen that morning, but it was not, as I said, unexpected. So, and since then, since January, we've been dealing with his estate and dealing with it, fixing up his house and going through all his belongings and stuff. So it's been, as I said, a season of stress and trials. But all through that, I've kind of thought about, when Doug asked me to talk, I tried to think about, well, what has it been? What things were there to help me keep my faith and keep my walk with God going? Because it'd be real easy to say, oh, why me? And just kind of, all this too much. And so I'll just share with you what helped me and what I think kind of helped. So the first is asking for and being willing to help, to accept help. It's harder than it sounds, but no one can get through this life alone, especially when we go through difficult situations. The main reason I was able to finish my house renovation was because I had friends come and help me put insulation in the attic and get into my crawl space to replace floor joists. I have a neighbor, Dan, who is retired and used to be a carpenter, and who would come over regularly with his own tools to help me with framing and teach me about the siding and how to install everything. When it came to my mom going into the hospital, our priest drove us to the airport early in the morning, and so we didn't have to pay for parking at the airport. Many people from our congregation would reach out to us and bring us meals. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And more importantly, don't be afraid to accept it either, I think. We have this idea in our mind that we got to tough it out and bear things alone on our own, but it's almost impossible, I think. During this period, too, I met regularly with a group of Christian men. We used the Lifeline series from Project 12 to share scripture, talk, and pray together for each other. And I always felt uplifted and fed after we would meet. And I knew that I could count on these men to keep me in their prayers whenever I needed them, and it was often. I could also count on them to be good role models of Christian life. And to try and find, so I encourage you all to try and find a group of guys that you can share your struggles with and who will listen and pray for you and lift you up. It's because of this group, as I said, that I was invited to speak today. Doug, has already outed himself, and there's another man in this group who's here today as well, but I won't call him out. And get yourself a buddy, or as Doug well put, as a must friend, as well as a group of guys that you can pray with. It is important to have a friend or friends that you can call anytime for any reason and know that they will listen and pray with you and keep you in their prayers. For me, this is my friend Tom, who lives in Kentucky, but I know that he keeps me in his prayers and as I keep him in mine. Find the silver lining, no matter how slim it might be. It may seem like a bit of a trope, but essentially, I believe it helps us to see God's glory in every situation. It also helps put things into perspective. My parents were not in the Army, but when my mom was in a fire, she was sent to Brooks Army Hospital only because she lived in an area where they would service communities outside of the military. And as hard as it was to hear that our baby would have to be on oxygen support and put into the NICU, it would have been a lot more difficult and traumatic for us if our son was born struggling to breathe and we had no idea what was going on or why or what would happen. The fact that we knew ahead of time sort of what to expect helped us to deal with that time. We were also blessed to have paid family leave, which I'll admit allowed us to focus and be near our son in the hospital and not have to worry about paying the mortgage and paying bills and how all that was going to work out. Remember also that there are those who may have it worse than you. We met parents in the NICU whose children perhaps would not ever get to go home, or not for a long time. We knew this one couple whose child was in the room next to us, and their child has had multiple surgeries and setbacks, and we were fortunate to have an otherwise healthy baby. We also recognized we had nothing to do with that good fortune. It was all grace. And I can't imagine but it helps to give me gratitude for the blessings I do have. And finally, just remember to pray to God. There are many more books and more qualified people to speak to this topic of prayer than I am. But God knows our needs before we ask, but we must still ask for his blessings. and for his help and for his guidance. And I'm not always great at doing this, but I often found that just saying the Lord's Prayer in the car before work or in a quiet moment just kind of helped recenter me so that I could deal with what had to be dealt with. So as I said, this was kind of a season of trials. However, it was also full of blessings. You know, my mom is still alive, and she's been staying with us this past week, helping to care for my son. We have a new son who's very healthy, and when he gets upset, you wouldn't believe that he had any sort of lung issues. You know, I have a new home, essentially, that's ready, and I don't have to worry about doing any maintenance for quite a while. And a whole new set of tools, which is also fun. This season of trials and stress, though, has helped me to be more thankful for the many blessings that God has given me. And there are many. And to find those blessings despite all the stresses of the world and the trials that you might be going through, even though we don't deserve them, will help get you through things. And my prayer has been that these strategies might offer some help to you all in your own trials. So thank you.
I just learned from Doug that William is the artist that painted the picture of the butterfly. So, impressive. An artist and a runner, so yeah. Our next speaker offers something for so many young adults and really anybody that has questions. He started a YouTube channel back in 2020 called Dad, How Do I? And as a young man, my father passed away back in 2009. Now, I remember those first couple times where I wanted to grab the phone and call my dad and say, hey, Dad, how do you cook your stew? Hey, Dad, how do you... And so, yeah, his videos mean quite a bit. And I know for people with other situations, they have his videos to go and look at. But the fact that many of his videos, he ends with, God loves you, and kind of ties up the importance of faith and knowing that regardless of what's happening, yeah, God loves you. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rob Kinney.
Thanks for having me here. A little bit of background on the Dad, How Do I thing. So my own dad left when I was 14. And so I started the channel almost as a resource for myself. For when I was a kid, I was thinking what things I didn't, that I had to learn the hard way, like how to tie a tie. I learned that from my my roommate when I was 19. And I remember kind of the pain of, why am I having to learn this from my roommate, right? And so I think I empathize with people that are going through the fact that maybe their dad hasn't been there, or their dad has left, or all the above. And so that's why the channel has turned into what it is. I thought I'd have 30 or 40 subscribers, and I have 4.5 million subscribers now. And I'm processing it too. And so I've shared, I think, with a few people that a few years ago I said, if I ever get up and speak in front of people, God's involved, because there's no way I want any of that. That's not me. I'd rather just sit in my pew and be comfortable and learn and, do my little bit. And so God has a sense of humor that I'm here. So just so you understand. I start out my channel by saying, hey kids, and I use that as a term of endearment to kind of like John when he says little children. I'm trying to walk alongside you and help you to learn how to do some things, and also be a good human being as a man of faith. I try to pass that along in my videos by saying God bless you at the end. And I've had people say, oh, you should leave that out. As a matter of fact, this morning somebody commented, oh, I love this, because I do a Wisdom Wednesday, and all wisdom comes from God, right? True wisdom comes from God. And so I end all those by saying, God bless you. And somebody made a comment, I love the wisdom, I just wish you would have left off the God bless you, because I can't share that, is what she said. And I'm like, really? There's worse things I could say than God bless you, right? So anyway, today I thought I'd give you a little bit of background just so you understand kind of what I'm also dealing with too, in trying to process what has happened to my life, because I wasn't planning on switching careers. I wasn't planning on doing this, and here I am. And to God be the glory. I'm absolutely trying to just do whatever he has me to do, and saying yes to whatever he has me to do, even if it makes me uncomfortable. I'm just going to do it. So, but the message I have for you today is one of the things that I like to do when I'm explaining something on my channel is I try to think of what where do we want to get to? What's the end? And so the title of my message is With the End in Mind, because if you're ever putting up sheetrock or doing any project for that matter, you want to kind of envision, what are we trying to get to? If you're putting up sheetrock, you don't want it to look like it's a bunch of pieces of sheetrock. You want it to be to where it all blends together, right? So that's the finished product. And so that's what I try to do. And so I think importantly for us as men, as people of faith, it's so important to remember that we're all going to die. We are all heading towards death. Might come sooner, might come later, but the reality is, I think in America we tend to, build bigger homes and we have more possessions and all these things. And then when somebody dies, it's like, wow, they died, but they were 95. I mean, what were you thinking was going to happen eventually? It's going to happen, right? It's going to happen to all of us. So. And Jim Brown, did you guys hear Jim Brown passed away? I mean, Jim Brown was a legend when I was younger. He was a little bit older than me, so he'd already kind of been this amazing running back, but he just passed, right? I mean, a strong, healthy, amazing man when he was younger, but it happens. So, and I think we tend to not talk about death almost because we think that we're going to jinx ourselves or something. I don't want that to happen. Don't mention that word. Rather be, what do they say about rather be here than 6 feet under? Well, as believers, because of what Jesus has done, we don't fear death, right? I mean, I'm skipping ahead here, so I better follow my notes. But death, death is a sobering reminder that something's not right in this world. And it's a reminder that things are temporary, I think we tend to get attached to things. And so if that is the truth, what are we aiming at? What are we aiming at? And what's the ultimate goal? Are we getting so bogged down in this life, or are we trying to bring in as many people as we can to heaven with us? One funny anecdote, I think of Toy Story and Woody and Buzz when they light the rocket and they're flying up above, and then Woody says to Buzz, Buzz, we're going to miss the truck. And he says, we're not aiming for the truck. Right? So if you get my point, we're not aiming for this life, right? There's so much more than what, if you set your sights on this, boy, it's a disappointment. So James 4:14, I got a lot of scripture here. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. I talked about my dad leaving when I was 14. I was 14, and then I was mid-20s raising a young family, and now I'm old. And, I'll be 59 end of May. My kids are out of the house, and now, I wake up with a sore, I pulled a muscle during sleep, I don't know how that happened. So it's weird to get old. It is, I think of myself as a young man still, but I'm almost 60 now. Have you guys heard of the Dash poem? You ever heard about that? I'll read it at the end here, but it just talks about your life, and on your tombstone, the dash is the dash in between the day you were born, the day that you die. But I'll read that at the end. And I lived close to the Tahoma Cemetery, and if you allow yourself any kind of time in a cemetery and look out and just ponder it and allow yourself to think, those are lives. Those are all lives that were here, and they're not here anymore, right? And we're all heading there. We're all heading there, whether you want to admit it or not. That's the end for all of us. So now that I've depressed all of you, thankfully, we have, so I talked about death, but we have new life. Jesus has given us new life. Somebody mentioned this one earlier in 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. So we no longer need to fear death. Hebrews 2:15 says that he freed those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. 1 Corinthians 15:55 through 57, where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, he gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Colossians, again, lots of scripture. I can't go wrong with scripture, right? Colossians 3:3, for you died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Philippians 1:21, Paul said to live is Christ and to die is gain. You didn't see the apostles worried about their homes, right? They're building bigger homes so they could set up camp here, right? They were living for the next life. And if you think about it, death is actually, in Genesis, after Adam and Eve ate from the forbidden tree, God protected them from the tree of life so that they wouldn't live forever in this fallen state, right? We have a sin nature and things aren't the way they're supposed to be. And God protected us from that being something that we always had to live with. Instead, we get set free from this body of death. Yeah, that was actually my next one. Paul says, what a wretched man that I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. And so an eternal perspective. I like the acronym ALIVE. It says always living in view of eternity, right? 1 John 5:13 says, these things are written so that you know that you have eternal life. I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I always thought that I was somehow earning my way into heaven. And so you can always, so it's always a little uncertainty. But I understand now that Jesus atoned for me, right? So Jesus is the hero. He's the one that paid the price for me so that I can know that I have eternal life, not because Rob's great, but because Jesus is great, right? Jesus is the hero. 2 Corinthians 4:16, I think you spoke on that earlier. Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. And then he goes on to say, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. That is so powerful because we get so caught up in our possessions and all these different things that are seen when really he's saying that those are temporary, right? And you think about Paul saying momentary troubles. Paul had some, he went through way worse than we do, right? Momentary troubles. I was actually reading this morning where Paul and Barnabas, they healed somebody. And then they were like, "Oh, the gods have come down. You know, let's worship them and sacrifice to them." And they're like, "No, we're just normal guys. Don't do that." And then suddenly, right after that, they went and stoned him. So how fickle people can be, right? They put him outside and left him for dead after stoning him. Right after they were just calling him a god. And Paul even says, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Colossians 3:1, if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. I think it just helps to put everything in perspective. I got a couple C.S. Lewis quotes that I love. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that other country and to help others do the same. He also says, we are half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. Jonathan Edwards also tells a story of this family they're on their way to vacation at the sea, and along the way they stop at an inn, and they decide to just stay at the inn. they never actually make it to the sea. They just and I think that's so similar to us, where we wait, you're going here, right? We're trying to get there, and I think not to act like you want to die necessarily, because God has us here for a reason. But I think it's important if you have that eternal perspective, boy, it just changes everything. You understand that this is temporary. Whatever struggles you're going through are temporary, and you can get through them. American Pickers. Do you guys like to watch American Pickers? I love to watch that, but it's interesting to watch it because there's so many people that have a motorcycle in their barn that someday they're going to fix up. And they're 80 or 90, and they can't let go of that motorcycle that they are going to fix it up someday. I can relate because I have things like that. I have projects, but boy, it's just almost comical that these people are so tied to these possessions when in reality you're never going to get to that. Just let it go. Let's see here. Philippians 3:20, for our citizenship is in heaven, from which we also eagerly await for the Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body that it may be conformed to his glorious body. Have you seen Beauty and the Beast? I'm pulling out my Disney references here, Beauty and the Beast, but how the castle is transformed. That always stuck with me because the castle was cursed, and then at the end it gets slowly transformed to and so there is still some beauty within the cursed castle, kind of like here, right? We still see God's beauty in this, but it's cursed. I just always thought that was an interesting picture. And then speaking of movies, have you seen an intense movie that you're not quite sure how it's going to end up, and you're kind of and then it comes out, okay, it ends great. It's kind of like that with us. We know the end, right? We know what's going to happen. So even though it can get intense, in the back of your mind, if you watch that movie the second time, okay, but I know how this thing ends. And so I know that I can feel good about where it's going to end up, even though you might have to go through some tough things during it. I think of that with It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life. It's so painful to watch. What's his name? Uncle Billy give away the money to Potter. Every time I cringe, but I'm like, okay, I know this is going to end good though. So I'm going to kind of end here. And I remember in math class doing a presentation on the further you are away from something and how precise your aim needs to be, the further away you are. Like if you're a golfer, you got to be really accurate, the further you are away. And I think that's so true in our own lives when we read the Bible and to be in the Bible. And I get it, I think we're all the same way. We're all fighting the same battle. There's so many distractions that want to keep us from that. But it's amazing how quickly you can be, boy, you're doing good, and then, you get away from it, and pretty soon you're off over here. And how did I get here? How did I end up here? I don't want to be here. I want to be back over here with you, Lord. Don't let me wander. That song, Prone to Wander, I can relate. Suddenly I'm, marching off where I shouldn't be. So and Jesus compared us to sheep in a loving way. But honestly, sheep are not that bright. I was talking to Ryan earlier, talking about the apostles. Again, my Catholic background, and if you go to Rome, they venerate Peter like he's this amazing saint. Peter was just like us. He's just a normal guy, fisherman that just God touched his life though, and transformed him, and it was the Holy Spirit working through him. It wasn't that Peter was this amazing guy that none of us could achieve. He was just a normal guy, right? So that's about it. So for the observant people, I did spell out the acronym END, but I did it backwards because working from, with the end in mind. So it talked about death, but we have new life, and then have an eternal perspective on your life, I think is critical. When I remember hearing those words years ago about having an eternal perspective, I think it changes everything, understanding the end and where we're all heading, right? So, all right, that's it. Thank you, guys.
How about we close in prayer and then we can go about our evening day? Yeah. All right. Heavenly God, Creator, we thank you for this opportunity to gather with like-minded men, to appreciate the opportunity to expand our minds, to think about ministry, and to grow in ways that we can do your will. Thank you for the speakers, for allowing them to be brave and to share their story. Allow their words to brew on our mind this coming week, to grow in our hearts, allowing us to interpret how we're supposed to live out our lives and be inspired to do more. Help us to grow as disciples. Help us to be stronger, faithful men in our communities. Watch over us in the days to come. Allow us all safe travels back to our home. Thank you for our friends and family allowing us the time to be here. And like always, it's in your holy, loving, gracious name we pray. Amen. Gentlemen, thank you all.